All right, vendor management solution in QualiWare. So last QualiWare user group meeting, Kevin mentioned that we were working on that type of a solution. And the goal is really to manage the full vendor lifecycle, including onboarding of those new vendors directly in QualiWare. And we found that use cases to be intriguing, so we accepted the challenge and wanted to go ahead and see what can we develop in QualiWare and what it's going to look like. And the results actually quite promising. Next slide, please. Why? Well, why did we develop it? So a couple of things. It's a really centralized source of truth repository for the vendor management, procurement staff, ensuring that they can find all the information about vendors and contracts in QualiWare. It's a collaboration platform with the key management stakeholders. We've prepared a few roles which we're going to demonstrate for you today, how they can collaborate together and streamline and enhance the vendor management, vendor onboarding process. And finally, it's about real-time data, real-time insights about the vendors, about the contracts, as well as integrated risk and compliance activities and tasks that you guys are aware that QualiWare is capable of. There are two others that I didn't mention on the list, and I thought about it and I should have written down. So I'm just going to spell it out for you guys. One of it is reusing the platform and ultimately reducing the total cost of ownership. I think with us realizing that QualiWare is just, it's a more than enterprise architecture tool, it's also a business management system. So reusing that particular platform for the vendor management purposes and domain, that really reducing total cost of ownership and driving that cost of license lower and lower. The other thing is driving collaboration among teams that have never thought of using QualiWare in the past. So again, we are talking about procurement or vendor management teams that primarily would not touch QualiWare because there was no particular functionality that would spark their interest. So now we're going to showcase you guys how could they actually utilize and maximize that process of streamlining vendor management in QualiWare and then their business, day-to-day business realistically. Next slide, please. Key functionality and features. So this is what the dashboard of the vendor management solution looks like. We've developed a couple of views actually. One of them would be from the vendor management. So vendor management would use that to create and enter the new information about vendors, editing the list of the vendors and contracts, seeing the onboarding information, tracking those active contracts, as well as seeing some statistics and charts and insights about what's happening with my vendors in the repository. We've also built a couple of other views there. You might notice the desktops at the top says risk and compliance assessment and sponsor for vendor management, as well as vendor management processes. So those two others, risk and compliance assessment and sponsor, that's a dedicated role that we have built in QualiWare, and that essentially to ensure that when you do vendor management, you're able to address some of that risk and compliance assessment items that onboarding teams have to do, as well as if there's a sponsor for the vendor management that want to view the oversight information of what is happening with the stock or roster of vendors in my organization, they're able to easily access that data. Next slide, please. Role-based access control. So we've built, as I mentioned, 3 particular roles, which Bruce is going to demonstrate. One of them is vendor manager. That's where we're going to be really spending time on. Risk and compliance officer. This is where they do risk assessments, essentially registering risk related to the vendors or contracts, as well as doing some compliance relevant work, such as seeing if compliance standards match the vendor's specifications and vice versa, as well as vendor sponsor, which I talked about already. So without further delay, if you can go to the next slide. We're going to do a live demo and Q&A. Bruce is going to take over and show you the main dashboard and desktops that our team have prepared. And I'm going to take over at some point and demonstrate you some of the automated workflows that we have for managing vendors and contracts in QualiWare. Bruce, on to you.
Okay, so where I'm going to start, I'm just going to take a couple of minutes and go through the full the vendor lifecycle management. I'm just a minute here. Is that still big enough for everybody?
Yep.
Okay, so everything starts with the purchase request. You're not, this isn't a one-off with staples for papers and pens. These are significant purchases, significant contracts that you would engage with the vendor. So these are the type of things that would come through vendor management typically. So first of all, if there's a request for purchase, and we're going to look at, is this something that we already have in an established vendor? And if not, we've got to go through the screening process for that vendor before we move on to the contract or the agreement that we want to enter with them. So what would happen would typically the vendor manager or someone from the vendor management team would enter information into the repository, like a vendor list, and they would set that record up as pending approval, because it's got to go through a screening process before it's approved. The vendor management would be responsible for collecting all the documentation that the risk and compliance team would need. Depending on the type of vendor, the type of business, there could be a variety of documents they need. Their incorporation license, financials, insurance type information. So vendor management were responsible for all of that. Once they get the information, that's enough for the screening. Notification would be sent to the risk and compliance team that they're able to begin their assessment. So they would do their assessment. They would provide risks. They would provide any risks that are there, any issues, and then they're updating all this information right within the repository of the vendor. When they're done their assessment, they would send a response back to vendor management saying they were done their assessment. And keep in mind, when I say GFW, that's governance workflow. So when I say send, or they receive and they send, that's vendor management will provide their recommendations and submit recommendation, and they'll send to the sponsor notification that the assessment is done. Once the sponsor has that notification, they have two options, because they'll have all this information to review. They would decide to reject the vendor based, maybe it's too high risk, maybe there's some significant concerns from the assessment, or they would approve the vendor. And once they've approved the vendor, that would flip the status of the vendor to approved. Same with reject. If they decided to click on reject, it would set the status of the vendor to reject for this process. If they approve the vendor, the next step would be to go through and assess the contracts or agreements that they would have to enter with that vendor. Very similar to the screening process, the vendor management would set up a contract within the repository as unapproved. They would coordinate the gathering of all the documentation that's needed for the different type of assessments. They would gather, if it's a security related purchase, they would gather information for IT security to review. And same with again, risk and compliance. They typically do a business impact analysis on these type of services or products that are purchased, to make sure that there's continuity plans are in place if the service is lost, or it's a license and the software goes down. So each of these would do their own assessment. Would do assessment. IT security would do assessment, send a response when they're done. IT or risk would become involved again to do the business impact assessment. And then when they're done, vendor management will receive notification that these assessments are done. And once again, the business would receive notification saying the assessment on the agreement or the contract or the purchase request has been completed. Again, the business would review it based on look at the feedback and the concerns, would either approve or deny the contract. And from that point, if it's approved, it will go to it will go down to finance to submit a purchase order outside of the realm of this, but this would be finance's decision to ultimately approve the purchase or not. If they approve, and an appeal would be issued, and the purchase will go against the PO. And at this point, vendor management would begin to monitor their contracts, monitor expiry dates, monitor notice of in terms of the notification that needs to be given if you're going to terminate your contract, all that kind of thing. Is there any questions on that? I know it's a lot, but I just kind of wanted to show everybody the full vendor management life cycle.
Just a quick comment about all of this process, Bruce. I'll add on that.
Sure.
We took that complex process, as you understand, every organization will have a different procurement and vendor selection processes, but we took that complex process and we tried to create easy to use, easy to understand tiles and dashboards for those key roles to utilize. So again, converting that complex view into the simplified and easy to understand tasks and dashboards. Thank you.
Right.
I think Karen had, just before you go on, Bruce, I think somebody else had their hand up for a second. Was it Karen?
Yeah. Just for clarification, is this software and hardware vendor, or are we talking about services such as if we were hiring a training organization?
This would kind of it would accommodate both, Karen. So if you see once we've got through the screening of the vendor, if we have, when we have an agreement in place, if it's IT related, there's a whole IT security assessment that we would go through, or would go through. They would look at the IT, their security protocols, risks, is there any equipment vulnerability? So they go through that assessment, and then it will go up to a business impact analysis. But so if from a service request, if there's no IT request and this is just a pure service request, or if it's an IT/service request, it would go through an IT security assessment, definitely.
Okay, so it's product, services, and hardware, software. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification.
No problem. So I mean, if it's just a situation where we want to go into kind of a long-standing an agreement where we want to buy computers, or we want to buy printers or photocopiers, it may not be an IT request, it may not be a service request. It may just go right through to, this is a regular purchase request, and the only stop is vendor management, and it may not even have to go through an IT security assessment or a business impact assessment. They may not have to do that. Again, so it may vary a little bit based on every organization functions a little differently. We would be able to configure this however they would need it to run.
Yeah. So then again, if a vendor on a regular basis was a Grandin toy for paper stocks, for instance, it would be tailored appropriately.
That's the whole idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Cecile, if you just, I have it minimized, so I'm not seeing hands that come up. So
yeah, I'll jump in if I see. Yeah, I'll jump in if I see something, Bruce. Yep.
Okay, great. So no other questions?
Nope.
Okay. So I'm going to take you to the desktops now. So as Kiro said, we have 3 different roles, one for vendor management, one, and I'm going to show them all by the end of it, one for vendor management, one for risk, and one for the sponsor. So as the vendor management, like we said, they have everything kind of starts with vendor management. They were going to create the vendor, they create the contract, fill pertinent information, gather all the documentation, and this would be the start. So if Cecile within close reach said, hey, we want to enter an agreement or purchase something with vendor ABC, this is where we would enter it. So we could, we just put in the company information here. So the sponsor, who's the sponsor here? So we want to insert, this is obviously Cecile, so let's put Cecile in here. Is your name in here? So there it is. Where's your name, Cecile?
In there somewhere. You might have to search by Cecile. There I am at the top. Yeah, you're right there. It's for some reason by first name.
the vendor management, we can pick a vendor management, or this get set up where oftentimes vendor management just a mailbox and there are multiple people in the vendor management, so we could set it up either way. Risk management, again, you know, if there's someone in particular you need to send it to, or we could send it to, if this is a general risk management mailbox, there's multiple people, we can add whoever we want in here. So let's go all employees, or no, we don't want that. That's Amir, you're the risk manager for us, or you're the vendor manager. Oops. And Anthony will be the risk manager for us. This is just free form type now, the vendor type. And the vendor status right now. So whenever we create a brand new one, it's always going to be pending approval. So then from pending approval, it can be denied, it can be approved or rejected, pretty straightforward. And then associated documents. So when we're setting this up, you may not have them now, but if you do, you want to add some documents to this. These are, I don't have anything set up for this one right now. We're going to go through and show, but these are all external documents that are related to the vendor. So these are just all connections to SharePoint documents, but I don't have anything for this fictitious vendor, so I'm just going to leave it at that, and we'll go through and show a list of vendors with all their documents here shortly. So I'm going to go okay, and the governance workflow engine would then send a notification to, I guess, Cecile, you were the, no, not Cecile, Amir, you were the vendor manager, so you would receive notification that there is something for you to look at. So once we've got the vendor set up, we have a list of vendors we can go to. So we've got vendors in there. We can do a group of, we can look at all the vendors that we have set up, and we can do mass updates. So here's the company, where's the company I just said, Ace Company. So here's the company that I just set up. We can go and we can update them within this spreadsheet. We can update anyone we want within the spreadsheet. What you can update are the vendor status, because that's all handled through the governance workflow. We don't want to override that. And you'll see that any contracts associated to the vendors are listed here, but you can't update those. You've got to update them within the contract, edit tile. So once we've got our list of vendors, we can create risks if we need for these vendors. You'll see this Ace Company that I created. If we're going through and we're looking, assessing this company, and we have a risk maybe we need to create for this company, we're going to create this company's of poor quality. But we can override these if the likelihood of significance isn't correct. If we need to say this is more of a high likelihood and a low significance, we can change those. So nice color coded, easy to see, you know, when you go to pull these up later on. So every risk I've identified here, we'll stay with it, and we've got reports that are going to show. So close on it. We can go to it at any time to view our vendor risks after the fact. This is a view tent. So again, nice colors, easy to pick things out. We can run reports. So these risks are always going to be against these vendors. So anytime we want to run any of the reports, we can run different reports against these. Now contracts, we have we don't actually have a create contract in here at this point, but if for the contracts that we have created, we have a list of the contracts. So you can see here's the list of the contracts. Here's the approval, the pending approval, the approved. So this is a way of just looking at right now what's outstanding as far as contracts and what have been approved. Again, you can update the contract, all the contracts information within this spreadsheet. Some of it you can't. Again, statuses you can't. Auto renewal, that's set as you can't update that it should be. And all the information related to the contract you can update within the spreadsheet. Same thing, you can edit risks that are identified, create and edit risks that are identified for specific contracts. As we're going through the assessment, I can add new risks. This is I want to create a new risk. Let's say this is a defect.
Carol, did you have your hand up?
Just want to provide a quick comment that
Sure.
those spreadsheets are there really for the bulk editing and bulk update and ensure that the right key stakeholders have all of the information in their hand without scrolling through, different Excel sheets that are never up to date. We don't know what's the version controller and so on. Remember, in QualiWare spreadsheets, it's a dynamic spreadsheet. So when we do the updates in one of those cells there, that gets reflected throughout the entire repository. All of the queries and tables and reports that Bruce will showcase you today gets reflected just by you clicking something in one of those spreadsheet cells. Thanks, Bruce.
Oh, thank you. This is loaded. I don't know why it's not saving right now. Seems to be hung up a bit here. Just a minute.
Just refresh the page, go back.
Yeah, there we go. It's hung up, but and we have the ability to look at. So I mentioned that part of vendor management they do is collect all the documentations needed for their assessments. So this is for those vendors that have been onboarded already. We have an easy access for vendor management to say, okay, here's the vendors, here's the type statuses. Some of them are still pending, and here's the documentation that was submitted as part of the screening process. So the Acme vendor here, this is a link to their documents on SharePoint. So you can integrate this with SharePoint quite easily. So what I've done is I've created all the documents and folders and put them on SharePoint and just created a link through the external documents within QualiWare. So it renders quite nicely here. Same with the contracts. So we have contracts and their assessments through IT security and the business and the assessment, the business impact assessment, all that information. Again, for each contract that you have any of this documentation, same thing. It's all maintained in external documents in QualiWare through ShareWell, and it's linked specifically to that contract. So that these set of documents that you use will be attached and flow through with this specific contract forever. So it's a great linkage between the two. Now we have vendor summary and contract summary. So these are nice. A way of looking where everything sits as far as approve versus the pending or rejected. So you can see right now we've got 9 approved vendors, 3 that are rejected, and 3 pending approval and 2 that are rejected. And you just go over to the list to see where they are. So you can see right now, here's all our approved vendors. Here's the contracts. If there's any that are related at this point, here's the contracts that are related to the vendors, rejected or not, they're all here. And just like, what am I looking for? Just like a pivot table, you can take this information, drag it over here, and sort it differently. So it's like an inline pivot table. Now you have in your contract, you have both, well, that's not what I wanted. I wanted, what was I looking for?
You can maybe pick another column, Bruce, but
Yes.
the end of the line that this is a filtering and sorting table.
Yeah,
right?
so we're
as well as a pivot.
We can have all are approved. It's like an inline a pivot table. So you can create. Here's all your rejected, your pending, your approval. So it gives a lot of flexibility when it comes to the way that you report this data within these in these reports. And same with contract summary. If you can go into contract summary, you'll see the pie chart of what's approved, denied, pending. Here's our list of approved contracts, pending contracts, and rejected. Now, I would say probably this would be the most used tile within our desktop. So track active contracts. So this is where I think, in vendor management, there's a lot of struggle. In my experience anyway, there's a lot of contracts. There's, in bigger companies, there's a lot of contracts. They have to provide notification before they terminate. They go through past this termination. They have contracts. They have applications that they're paying for. They don't even know they use. So what we have here is this is a great dashboard for looking at all our existing contracts. So here's the contracts. Here's the type. But you'll see we have, is it auto renewed or not? What's the termination notification date? Well, there's always a date. So a lot of the times you have to provide a 68 notice of termination, or you automatically get renewed and have to pay. And that's oftentimes what gets a lot of companies in missing this termination notice date. So this is saying, here's your date. Here's a number of days until your notification is due. And oh, by the way, it's passed. The termination notification date is approaching. So I think right now the threshold is 30 days. So you've got 16 days left to provide your notification. Here's the start date of the contract. Same thing. Here's the termination date. How many days till you terminate? And again, termination or the contract expires soon because we're within 30 days. And you get set that 30 days, 45 days, whatever fits best for you. And this one, you can see it's -3, so the contract has expired.
So, Bruce, I'm just going to comment on this. So this is a great way to optimize all of your vendors as well as optimize the costs associated with upkeeping those vendors, and how many subscriptions do we have in place? How many products are there that we don't need to use or need to use? And then where is this traceability? So that's where you can find that traceability as well as source of truth for you, looking into all of those links associated with contracts as well as vendors. So quite comprehensive. Thank you.
Absolutely. So again, now I'm going to show the different desktops at this point. So if I go into now role based, so as the vendor manager, I get all of this information. I get everything that everybody gets. But if I am, say, at one of the folks in risk, my role is going to be different in what I need. And this is the information that you're going to see. You're going to see the vendor list. You're going to be able to edit your risks because as the assessor, you're the one providing the risks. You want to, and all of these tiles are on the vendor management as well. You want to mass edit the contract, and same tile that was in the vendor management. You want to do bulk updates. You're able to do it. Back. Edit your contract risks. See all the vendors. Vendor onboarding information is obviously very important to you because this information is probably more the information you want than even vendor management. They're just collecting that information for you. Assessing the contract assessment information, view vendor risks and view contract risks. So again, you would have seen all of these in the vendor management desktop. And if we change our role just to the sponsor, this just gives you an update of pending requests. So here's your pending contracts. If you've requested the contracts that are pending, or the vendors that are pending, if it's a new vendor, would be in here. contracts, pending contracts for purchase requests are in here. And as soon as they're approved, they will come off this list. There's no, the vendor management, or excuse me, the sponsored has no tiles for updating anything. They have no tiles for inputting anything. You know, typically a request comes from the sponsor to vendor management. It's typically in the form of an email, a call. So there didn't seem like there was a lot of use of putting some kind of a tile to create a request in here. Not saying you couldn't do it, but for this purpose of you know, the model that we built, we just didn't build it in there.
With you to configure and integrate that solution into your business operations, we trying to understand what's your internal processes, policies, and standards are. So obviously some of those tiles on embed and, you know, initiation process for getting a new vendor, this could be up to the sponsor. This might be another key stakeholder in the place where you have. So again, whatever you see in here for the tiles and dashboards and what it looks like, as well as charts, that's the configuration and implementation work that we work with you guys to define. How do we fit that your internal operations? Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you. So I'm going to hand it back off to you, Kirill, to walk through just the governance of the governance workflow piece for what we've developed so far.
Thank you, Bruce. So Bruce has showed you the main functionality of the vendor management solution. I'd like to highlight you some of the automated capabilities that we have built and we have in QualiWare in order to maximize that vendor management work. So as you, I'm assuming you guys can see my screen, can you?
Yeah, looks fine.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So a couple of things I want to highlight. So again, here is the quick search for the vendors and contracts. And Bruce talked about, you know, the concept that we have behind our solution. We want to have an ability to create the objects, bulk edit them, and then view or do the analysis of this information as you see on those tiles. So viewing, tracking, you know, seeing the summaries of things that's happening in that repository. So two items I want to highlight is a governance workflow engine. And for those who don't know, governance workflow is of robotic process automation and automated workflow capabilities. So if you don't want to keep sending people reminders about, hey, can you take a look at this particular vendor or this contract? When are you gonna be able to send your response or your feedback on that? Our system is able to automate that process. So when I click on that particular vendor onboarding info matrix and I click on ACB communications, this is going to open the profile for that particular vendor. And you will notice that we see who is the sponsor, what's the vendor type, what's the status of that particular vendor is, what's associated documents. And then we will notice over here the exclamation mark. And for those who haven't seen the exclamation mark, this is our governance workflow I was talking about. So you will notice that currently this particular vendor is in a sponsored status, So he's just right in the infancy of beginning of all of the vendor onboarding process we have in place. You will notice that there are a few roles or actors that have to make a decision based on whether, you know, this vendor particularly moves throughout the workflow. So there's internal sponsor, which we talked about, vendor manager, risk and compliance officers. Again, it goes back to the vendor management internal sponsor as well for the final assessment. And then the internal sponsor makes the decision whether it's approved or rejected. There's also some things like those red arrows that we built that could reverse back the process or bring us back if there's certain information missing, or let's say they did not fit the risk criteria that risk and compliance officer had in place. They could be rejected right on the spot. So once I click on that, I will send it to the handling and the information gets updated. You will notice that I no longer have access to the governance workflow. That means that now the decision is with somebody else. Somebody else in the food chain needs to make a decision based on this vendor and the information that I submitted to them. In the governance history, obviously, there is got to be information about Bruce, who has sponsored that particular vendor, as well as myself, who essentially moved that move the stage for the vendor from sponsor to pending approval. That's for the that's for the vendors itself. Now, whenever we move stuff, there's a triggers in place, right? We want to automate that process. We want to make sure that people get notifications with the right pieces of the information, and then they have their to-dos, they have their tasks, they know what they need to do, so you don't have to chase them, 500 times with emails saying, have you done that? So here was one of the examples of the emails that would be sent, was sent to us actually. So notification about contract management. You have the list of the stakeholders who should be aware of that particular contract, and then you need to review that contract. Here is the link to that contract. All of that, again, is fully configured and customized based on your internal operations, what kind of format you want to have, what type of information should be included in those automated notifications. The other part is we didn't want to build the process just and the governance workflow just for the actual vendor. We also wanted to have it for the contract. And the contract and the vendor could go for the completely different approval stages. Again, your internal business operations would govern that, but we realized that process might be different. You might approve the vendor. You might not necessarily approve a number of contracts that are associated with that particular vendor. So when I go to the actual, I'm going to click contract assessment info. That pulls me the information about the contracts that Bruce have highlighted. And when I click on one of those, this is going to give me information about the contracts. Again, you have short description, you have some attributes about it, what's the cost associated, what's the start date, termination date, and so on. And then here's you have a governance and acknowledge history again in place. So when I click on the exclamation mark, this will open a completely different automated governance workflow from what you've seen before. We have, somebody who is responsible for the contract. We have a number of people that this contract should be circulated to. We also then, that goes back to the contract responsible for a person for renegotiation or setting that it's a valid contract, as well as retiring or expiring this, notifying when this contract gets expired. So again, the goal is to say that there's no such a thing as one box fits it all. We would have different governance workflows as well as automated tasks and actions enabled for particular objects. And that would be contract, and that would be vendor. That could also be documents. That could also be processes or policies that you might need to review. Again, the governance workflows and automated steps would be different. So in a nutshell, that's what we have built. It's really, we see that easy to use, easy to read system where you can onboard new vendors, make sure that they have all of the relevant vendor risks information, compliance information. You're able to conduct a contract assessment. You're able to track those active contracts. Again, what Bruce just showcased you here right now, this is golden for somebody that, Bruce mentioned that he has encountered many situations where somebody is past due. How do we know that? Where is this information located? Again, this is a centralized source of truth for you guys to find all of that information relevant. Last but not least, I will bring this process one more time, just for you guys to understand that the vendor management could be very complex, and it's a broad term. It could be different, and it would be different from organization to the organization. And then our goal was to really take all of that complex and comprehensive process and this BPMN diagram that you see and build those nice to use, nice to analyze, and easy to understand tiles and dashboards that the vendor team as well as procurement teams are able to use. Are there any questions, any comments about the tool, about the solution we just showcased you?
Thank you, Carol. I don't see anything in the chat just yet, but while we're waiting to see if anybody has any questions, we do also have a summary of the vendor management benefits reference document that I'm just going to pop into the chat. If you're able to download it, great. If you run into some trouble with that, we'll include it in the recording, or you can reach out to me separately to receive a copy of it. So it's just a handy dandy one pager with all of the lovely benefits of.
So the other component of this that we foresee being valuable in vendor management here, right? It's all about supply chain management. Who is our supply chain? You know, what are they providing to us? Now let's take it and look at it from a sustainability perspective. When an organization needs to look at the sustainable practices that are coming from their suppliers, people that supply information to them. And QualiWare has that sustainability management component built into it because it comes from Europe with the sustainability reporting requirements that are in place there. So you could tie this supply chain management component to sustainability to get a better picture of how your organization is evergreening, you know, not just within the technology base, but overall. So I guess a further extension, possible extension to something like this.
Okay.
But
I'm
at
glad-
least if
Got it.
you are interested in viewing the solution, or if you think some of your fellow colleagues in procurement and vendor management are interested in exploring this tool, let us know. We'll be happy to organize the demo or even a guided trial in our environment to play with the tool.